Hello, thank you for listening. My name is Mary Rose. I have been a volunteer at Veterans Memorial Hall. They showed me a scrapbook of some ladies in uniform and said they did not know what it was. They didn't think it was military. And I said, oh my gosh, can I research this? What was discovered was a Rockford first and a Rockford original, the Women's Ambulance Safety Patrol. So the scrapbook was kept by Mary Trosper, who grew up in Rockford. And then in 1943, she was working for Bell Telephone and they transferred her to California to work for Pacific Bell until 1968. Mary decided when she retired she was going to move to France because she wanted to learn to speak French and she wanted to learn art. Oils, watercolors, pencil sketches. She even painted ostrich and duck eggs. In 1968, she returned to Rockford and lived in her home on School Street and opened a photography studio. So this picture of Jesus is also one of her sketches, but a lot of people in the area may have had pictures taken in the 70s and 80s by Mary Trosper. So if you have pictures from that time period, turn them over and see if her stamp is on the back. While I was doing this research in the newspaper, I discovered everything was called W.A.S.P in the early 40s. There was the aircraft carrier, the W.A.S.P. Pratt & Whitney had a jet engine that was a W.A.S.P. Schaefer made pens that literally said W.A.S.P. on the tip and on the side. They even had desk sets. And ladies, look at that horror. I guarantee you, the day I was born, my waist was bigger than that. In 1943, the Women's Air Force Service Pilots began. These ladies were an auxiliary to the Air Force. They shuttled the aircraft from the manufacturers to Europe and Africa. That is a totally different group than what I'm going to talk about today. The Women's Ambulance Safety Patrol was strictly in Rockford. One of the other things I found called W.A.S.P was the Marmon W.A.S.P won the Indy 500. So there's two reasons why I think the ladies of Rockford were anxious to start this group. In World War I, Camp Grant was an induction center that was hit very hard with the Spanish flu pandemic, and the Red Cross formed a Red Cross ambulance corps at that time. And I met a lady in Rockford who had modeled one of those Red Cross ambulance corps uniforms for her church, and she wanted to show me the picture. The other thing that had happened was in 1928, the National Chair Company, along with several other businesses, were hit by a major tornado that ripped through southeast Rockford. I don't know if you can see it, but on the second floor of the building, all the chairs are still stacked neatly, but the wall is gone. So the whole community of Rockford pulled together to help after that tornado. All of the women who were involved in this would have been alive by that time and possibly would have gone down there with their families to see all the damage. So Dr. Albert Roseborough was a doctor in Rockford who had done his internship in Europe. And as the war was ramping up in Europe, he was fascinated watching what was happening in Europe and the women in Europe that had stepped up to help. He was particularly interested in a group of women from Finland called the Lada Svard, and his idea was to model something similar to that here in Rockford. So he asked Jean McGraw, one of these ladies, on April 3rd, 1940, she gathered a group of 8 women and they met with the police department, the police white vehicle, which was, you can see it just barely in the background, a white station wagon that a stretcher could fit in. And these three officers are explaining to the ladies the different features of the stretcher and what was inside the police white car, because at that point in time, there were not very many ambulance services in Rockford. This is one of their envelopes. Their motto was safety in time of peace, service in time of disaster. In order to be a WASP lady, you needed to be between the ages of 18 and 40, have American citizenship, and be physically and mentally sound. Mentally sound. Wow, that's interesting. Their first office was in the Rockford Gas, Light, and Coke building, which was on the southwest corner of Mulberry and Wyman. They had their first enlistment rally on April 30th, 1940. I asked a lot of people in Rockford, where was the federal building in 1940? And no one knew. Surprise, surprise, it was the post office. The building still stands today. It's owned by the park department now, so you can go inside and see the beautiful marble walls and the great grill work in the building. This is the old courthouse. This is where the women went to receive their ranks. They often met there for other things. This is an addition to the courthouse, and this portion is still standing. The main courthouse no longer stands. Gertrude Cassell is the woman in the middle, and her family shared this picture with me of the WASP ladies. On the picture, it was written 1939, which I proved in the newspaper. She must have written the date later by memory because they didn't start until 1940. So the women were on several different committees during that time period. And the woman second from the left is Louise Doyle. She was representing the WASP ladies. The woman all the way on the right is still in high school at this point. She is Barbara Hale, who was Perry Mason's secretary in the old Perry Mason series. So what did the WASP learn? The WASP learned 20 hours of first aid, military drilling, 40 hours of motor mechanics, and that's what separated them from every other group in the country that started to do something similar. They would get their driver's license. If they didn't have one yet, the WASP would help them get their driver's license. They learned convoy transportation, canteen cooking in case there was a disaster and they needed to feed 300 people, map reading, blackout driving, use of firearms. They had gas chamber training, sanitation training, and evacuation training. Their uniforms did cost money, and some of the women that wanted to join were not well off financially, so they worked together in order to pay for their uniforms, and they had fundraiser dances. Their first dance was at Paulson's Barn in Argyle, and I thought it was interesting that they would prep the floor with cornmeal and paraffin so they could dance on it. And when Jerry Paulson sent me the picture of the barn, he also sent me a picture of the stage that was inside. One of the times when the women learned their motor mechanics, they were at General Tire and Battery. And I have only lived in Rockford 6 years, so I wanted to know where this was. The building in the middle of the picture with the peaked roof is Veterans Memorial Hall. The building on the right with the dome is the old library, and under the little green banner is General Tire. So the ladies of Rockford were very, very excited about what they were doing, and they wrote letters to friends and relatives across the country. Dorothea Vivian had grown up in Rockford but was living in Pomona, California. When she got that letter, she thought, well, I can do that with my friends, and she did. So the Pomona unit was number 2. This is the Pomona Charter. Now, they had a field hospital available to them, a trailer field hospital. The Rockford group did not. If there had been a disaster in Rockford, the Red Cross would have set up the field hospital and the WASP ladies would have brought the injured to that field hospital. The Pomona group had slacks. I never found a picture or anything that said that the Rockford women had pants. But I love this picture because the 48 star flag is in this one. The Pomona group also had an equestrian group. I found nothing that said that the Rockford women did, but living in the Midwest, I have no doubt many of the women already knew how to ride. On August 12, 1940, the women of Rockford received their state of Illinois charter, and then every other WASP group in the country was chartered through the Rockford group. And they were to be for homeland relief only in case the war came to our country. They were to stay here in case we were bombed or we were at war. They were to help within Rockford, within the county, and within the state. So each group would do that in their own state. This is still privately held by a family member, but this is the Women's Ambulance Safety Patrol Embosser stamp. I was very excited to see that. The women had to learn to drive a car, a truck. They even gave them tractor driving lessons at the old driving park in Rockford, which had its entrance at Fulton and Huffman. This is Maxine Dodge seated here in an ad in the newspaper for a Thor Glad iron. It's an iron that would iron flat pieces. Obviously, it also did sleeves, but she is wearing her uniform. They had their first fundraiser picnic at Svidoid Park. I am sorry, I always do not pronounce that correctly. The picnic lasted from 10 o'clock in the morning. They had events all day. They had concessions. At 8 o'clock at night, they had a children's talent contest. After that, they hosted a dance on the wood dance floor in the park. Typically, their dances lasted till 1:30 in the morning. Remember, the picnic started at 10 a.m. They were raffling off a brand new Nash. And one of the people in one of my presentations said that Barbara Coleman gave away cars often. So I am assuming Barbara Coleman gave them the car. I wanted to know where that park was. So this is Highway 2 heading south of Rockford at the Rock River. And there you can see where the park was by the little banner. It's right across the road from where Camp Grant was. There were other organizations in the country that started ambulance corps under different names. In California, the Women's Ambulance and Defense Corps was very prominent. They attracted some Hollywood starlets, and this is Ida Lapino. Now, she had this telephone switchboard inside her home. If there had been a disaster, they would call and wake her up, and she would rush to the switchboard and start making calls. Probably not looking quite that good in the middle of the night. Mildred Frances Bird was the treasurer for the W.A.S.P ladies in 1940. She was involved in a car accident and died 5 weeks later. They believe she may have had a blood clot as a result of the accident. 6 of the W.A.S.P ladies were honorary pallbearers for her. This is their first uniform. They do not yet have their 4-pocket jacket, but they got their uniform in December of 1940. They met sometimes at Emmanuel Episcopal. Rector Ridgway was very involved with the group, and very supportive of the group. The group met Monday nights and Wednesday nights for 2 hours. But one of those nights, they're all women. Women chat. And so the meeting ended 45 minutes late. The woman in charge had had enough. She called Camp Grant and she said, "I need a drill sergeant and I need him now." So Drill Sergeant Eddie came and he taught the women to stand at attention, sit quietly for 2 hours while they learned their evening, and then stand at attention to be dismissed, go home, thank you very much. So the women had been under Robert's Rules of Order until that point, at which point they started military drilling. This was one of their membership cards for 1941. I can only assume, because 300 women were trained, but only 45 were active, that the 300 women that were trained would carry this card in their pocket. So the ladies had another dance at the Hotel Faust. All of their dances were semi-formal, cabaret style. So what is cabaret style? Think of a round table. You would take away the 2 chairs from the people who would have their back to the stage or the orchestra, and that's what cabaret style meant. The dance had the orchestra of the Al Raymond's Orchestra, and I thought all these orchestras were local, but the Al Raymond's Orchestra was from Philadelphia. 2 of the W.A.S.P ladies were related to the Raymonds, so maybe there was a family connection that brought them here. They participated in an Office of Civil Defense event at Bell Bowl, which was originally called Calvary Bowl. It was on the property of Camp Grant, which is now the property of the Rockford International Airport. This was possibly a meteorite strike. It was a depression in the earth that made it acoustically perfect. So they would have fireworks there and other large events there. This happens to be a picture of a prize fight with Joe Louis. Betty Mae Carlson Paoli, I was able to track down her son because her husband owned a business in Rockford. He owns the patent on a meat deboner and the zip out shrimp cleaner, both of which are on display at Midway Village in the business exhibit, if you happen to be there. So I asked Lou if he had any pictures of his mom in the Women's Ambulance Safety Patrol. And he said she wasn't in that. She was in the Women's Rifle Team Auxiliary. And I said, okay. He said, I have a picture of her in a uniform. And I said, would you send it to me? And when I saw the hat with the W.A.S.P on it, I was very, very excited. Oddly enough, the picture he had been printed backwards and W.A.S.P was flipped, so we had to turn the picture over. That's the first time I realized they had a full-size flag march in the parades. Betty Mae Carlson is the lady on the left marching in the parade. They participated in other war bond drives. This happens to be the 5th war bond drive in 1944. They had their Thanksgiving dinner at the Mayflower restaurant, which is now called Hope and Anchor in Rockford. They had a Christmas party at the home of Sally and Louise Doyle. As you recall, I told you Sally and Louise were sisters that were in from beginning to end, but they lived on Camp Grant property, which made no sense because their father was not in the military. Turns out their father was the Camp Grant plumber. This picture was taken in the basement of the Armory in Rockford. There are 65 women in uniform and 5 men. I need your help. I can only identify about 20 of these women. So there is a picture where each of the faces are numbered, and it will be shared with the library for you to take a good look at, because it could be your grandmother, your mother, your cousin, your neighbor, someone you knew on a committee, someone you golfed with, your teacher, your Girl Scout leader. You never know. You might be able to help me identify one of these ladies. According to newspapers, 300 ladies were trained, only 45 were active. So I have a list of 200 women's names because they appeared in the newspaper. But if their name was not in the newspaper as an officer or on the committee for a specific event, then they were a member that I could not find the name because the list of names was not in the scrapbook. Back to the picture. This picture is in the basement of the armory. In the center picture of the picture on the floor, you see a mark on the floor. That's where the National Guard would park equipment. Behind the women is a concrete bunker where ammunition was stored. The rafters are all concrete because the National Guard would unlock the door on the first floor, drive the 2.5-ton trucks into the building, lock the door to keep all the National Guard armory equipment secure. On April 10, 1947, the Women's Ambulance Safety Patrol officially dissolved. They retired their flags to an American Legion auxiliary post inside Memorial Hall on that day. And then on June 29, 1948, the state of Illinois officially dissolved their charter. While I was doing presentations, I met Marguerite Kisting Heverin. She had attended one WASP meeting right before she went into the waves. I was so excited. I interviewed her, and all she remembered was they did a lot of drilling. The WASP ladies drilled roughly 1 hour every time they met. I need to thank a lot of people for their assistance in putting this all together. Veterans Memorial Hall and Museum, the Command Post Restaurant, which is now closed, Midway Village Museum, the Rockford Public Library history staff, the Rockford University Library Collection, Lou Paoli for sharing the photographs, and Cameracraft for blowing that picture of 65 women up to 36 inches long. I also want to let you know that all of this information has transferred from Veterans Memorial Hall and is now in the archive collection of the Midway Village Museum. If you should have any questions, any comments, any reason to get a hold of me to add names, to have me come and do a free presentation for your group, please contact Laura at the Midway Village Museum, or you could use my email address, B as in boy, A, R as in Robert, L as in Larry, E, N as in Nancy, A, the number 80 at hotmail.com. I thank you all so very much for watching this presentation. Thank you.